Hi everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balkavage. We're back for another edition of Thyroid Thursday, and today we're continuing our discussion on how hypothyroidism develops. And so the first two videos I talked about the difference between cellular and glandular hypothyroidism. We talked about how hypothyroid symptoms result as decreased thyroid hormone, active thyroid hormone at the peripheral cellular level, and it's not about the gland. You can have hypothyroid symptoms and cellular hypothyroidism with normal or abnormal gland function. Doesn't make a difference, okay? It's definitely more likely if you have a glandular problem, but you can definitely have hypothyroid symptoms and definitely have cellular hypothyroidism with a totally normal functioning thyroid gland. So we talked about stress can trigger what's called a cell danger response. And we wanted to kind of touch on that and explain that a little bit more today. So stress, whether it's physical stress, chemical stress, or emotional stress, or microbial stress on the cell can create a drop in energy within the cell, and it can trigger this thing called a cell danger response. And the cell danger response is this evolutionary conserved metabolic response that the main goal is to protect the cells and the host, okay? Unfortunately, sometimes we don't feel good when that process is going on. When this cell danger response kicks in, there's a number of things that occur at the cellular level. So I'll kind of go through these and then I'll explain it. Hopefully it makes it a little bit more understandable. So one of the first things that happens is there's a change in structure of cell contents. And this change occurs to make the cell contents less usable by whatever the threat is. Whether it's a bacteria or a virus, the virus or bacteria is less likely to use them if the cellular intelligence changes the structure of these contents. The problem is that then those contents are less usable for us too. So that can make us not feel as well. The second thing that happens is the cell membranes stiffen, okay? And when the cell membranes stiffen, then it's doing that to protect, to trap the bacteria, the virus, the heavy metal, whatever that threat response is. By stiffening these cell membranes, you kind of trap these things in the cell and they can't get out of the cell. The problem is if we stiffen these cell membranes, then things can't transport in as easy either. And that would be things like T4 and T3. So if we have stiffening of the cell membrane, we change the structure of the cell membrane, thyroid hormone can't transport into the cell. If it can't transport into the cell, the serum levels will look normal because they're not going anywhere. But inside the cell, we won't have T4 and T3 to bind to receptors and stimulate metabolism. So you'll have hypothyroid symptoms, okay? This doesn't happen. The third thing that happens is antimicrobials are released. So the cell itself can spit out a bunch of antimicrobial products to try and kill any bacteria or virus or whatever that threat response is out here. Fourth, the cell itself will go through what's called autophagy, which is essentially an internal cellular cleanup. It'll start cleaning up some of the dead debris, cleaning up some of the cellular structure in an effort to clean up the stuff so the virus and the bacteria can not have things to feed on or to use as resources and actually help get rid of the bacteria and the virus itself. We then start to see a change in gene expression along with genetic variations. So this cell danger response can actually trigger changes in how our genes express, and it can create variations in how those genes function. The seventh thing that happens is the body also releases a whole bunch of inflammatory or warning chemicals. So these chemicals go out to all the other cells of the body. And we're going to talk about that further because part of this process is something that can actually help trigger autoimmunity. And then part 8 is the cell danger response induces something called sickness behavior. You actually get a depletion of serotonin in the body, and that makes us depressed. And part of that is to make us lay down, let rest, recovery, and get away from other people so we don't infect them. So that's the cell danger response that can induce a hypothyroid state. So let me go back through this again and kind of cover this. So if we have a cell here, this little thing down here is called our mitochondria, and cells have a bunch of these mitochondria in them, and these are like the engines or the brains of the cell. And they kind of keep an eye on how much energy is within the cell. And so when you have a virus or a bacteria or a heavy metal enter into the cell, these things utilize energy or steal energy. This causes a drop in electricity or energy within the cell. And that drop in energy, once it hits a certain level, these mitochondria sense that, hey, the energy inside the cell has dropped too far, and there must be some type of threat, infection, virus, toxin inside the cell. And then the goal of this cell is to downregulate the health of the cell to try and kill whatever this is. And the ways it does that is, one of the ways it does that is, as we talked about here, it can stiffen these cell membranes. And if it stiffens the cell membranes, one of the things that can happen is we can't transport T4 and T3 across that cell membrane as easily. So these transport mechanisms, these transport hormones don't work as well. And so we have decreased T4 and T3 inside the cell. And you might think, well, why would the body do that? Why would the cell do that? Because viruses and organisms can use our own DNA to replicate. We don't want to speed up the metabolism of the cell, make that cell healthier, because the viruses and the bacteria can then replicate. They can grow. We may get a sicker cell. The other thing that happens is if I have a drop in energy in the cell, these transport proteins actually require energy. So if I have a drop in energy within the cell, I'm going to have less energy to transport thyroid hormone across the cell. And I've talked about this on previous videos, that the T4 requires the most energy to transport across the cell. T3 requires less energy to transport across the cell. So two things happen here. That we get the stiffening of the cell membrane, and then we get a drop in energy, and both of those things decrease the amount of thyroid hormone that can be transported into the cell. Okay? And if we have less thyroid hormone transported in the cell, the blood volume can look good. We can have normal T4 and T3, but within the cells themselves, we will have a low thyroid hormone state. And this is not an accident. This is by design. If we brought more thyroid hormone into the cell, then what we would have is increased metabolism of the cell. Increased metabolism and replication of the cell could actually spread the bacteria, spread the virus, or increase the number of sick cells we have, and that's something we call cancer. So this is not an accident. This is not a mistake. Hypothyroidism is at the cellular level. The cellular hypothyroidism is a normal cell danger response to try and deal with a perceived threat. The problem is that threat might be microbial, could be bacteria or virus, but it could be emotional. Emotional stress can create the same mechanisms. Chemical stress like heavy metals or other chemicals can create the same mechanisms, and physical stress can create the same mechanisms because this mitochondria don't know the difference between those. All it knows is there's a drop in energy within the cell, so the threat response is the same, okay? So this was how hypothyroidism develops, part 3, and we talked about most times hypothyroidism starts at the cellular level as a result of a stress response, and it's a self-induced state of hypothyroidism, and it's a protective mechanism, not a mistake, okay? So we're going to talk about in the future videos, we're going to talk about how this can trigger autoimmunity. We're also going to talk about why potentially giving thyroid hormones when this is going on could make you feel good temporarily, but it could actually create more problems down the line, okay? So this was part 3 of how hypothyroidism develops. Look for another video in this series in the following week, okay? Take care.